Did the real willing to go far and beyond? Did the real saw you came up the other day? Did the real willing to please you in any way? I said you've been watching me. I know you've been stalking me. I know you like chocolate. Kiss me from the head down to my feet. Baby, Gloria, baby. I know you wanted the real. I know you wanted the real, baby. Smoke. I know you wanted the real. I know you're the only one. They call you the only one. You said I'm the only one that can make you come. You said I can do it, baby. You said we can do it safely. You said you want me to grind and from behind. You said grown men won't know 24/7 on the go. You said did the real run it deep in that hole. I'm like, baby, goddamn, I'm on it right now. I'm like, baby, let's get it. Let's do it like that. I know you wanted the real. I know you wanted the real, baby. I know you wanted the real. They call her the creepy people. She says she wanna know the sequel. To let her tongue go low. She said she likes to do it, tryna dick full of spit. Look at the rail, no hands, let the mouth expand. She got my shit hard and ready. Look the way she like to go steady. Did the rail about to go and let it flow. Baby, you wanna let time waste right now. Wanna hear you make that freaky ass sound. I know you wanted the real. I know you wanted the real, baby. I know you wanted the real. I know you want it to real. I know you want it to real, baby. I know you want it to real. Glory on, baby. Did the real willing to go far and beyond? Did the real saw you came up the other day? Did the real willing to please you in any way? I said you've been watching me. I know you've been stalking me. I know you like chocolate. Kiss me from the head down to my feet. Baby, glory on, baby. I know you want it to real. I know you want it to real, baby. Slow. I know you want it to real. I know you're the only one. You're the only one. Yeah, I'm the only one that can make you come. You said I can do it, baby. You said we can do it safely. You said you want me to grind in from behind. You said grown men won't know 24/7 on the go. You said did the real run it deep in that hole. I'm like, baby, goddamn, I'm on it right now. I'm like, baby, let's get it. Let's do it like that. I know you want it to real. I know you want it to real, baby. I know you want it to real. They call for the creepy people. She says she wanna know the sequel. To let her tongue go low, real slow. She says she likes to do it. Drawn a dick full of spit. Look at the rail, no hands. Let the mouth expand. She got my shit hard and ready. Look the way she like to go steady. Did the rail about to go and let it flow. Baby, you don't wanna let time waste right now. Wanna hear you make that freaky ass sound. Welcome, everybody. This is D. Durrell with the Conscious Clientele. Today, I am happy to have this late night session today. I'm going to be presenting and discussing with you in detail. I'm going to talk about post-traumatic stress disorder. I'm going to talk about my experience treating this particular mental health disease. I'm going to talk about the family of disorder that this comes from. I'm going to talk about the treatment. I'm going to talk about the type of therapy and modalities that are utilized. I'm going to talk about the medications briefly as it relates to this. And so this month is Mental Health Month, the month of May itself. And I'm looking at this particular video as a form of psychoeducational interaction between me as a professional and you as the listener. This particular video is something that is going to reflect a lot of what I usually educate on when I'm on my D. Durrell Life Solutions page, in which I pretty much discuss various types of mental health issues. I pretty much discuss things as it relate to mental health and treatments and so forth. So this is the perspective that I'm going to present today. I will not be doing any panels tonight. This is pretty much going to be educational, and then you can kind of take from it as you please, as it relates to the information that I am going to present. And I like to say, I didn't begin having experience treating people with PTSD until about probably 2003, 2004. And when people think of PTSD, they normally think of a disorder that influences the behavior of people, that this type of behavior was attributed by negative behaviors such as being in war or warfare, gunplay, and things of that sort. It's mostly associated with war heroes, with people who are veterans. One of the largest populations of people who've experienced PTSD were those that experienced it from war, particularly Vietnam vets, particularly those that were Gulf War vets, those that have been in Iran and Iraq, those that have served in the military, and they served in some form or fashion in which they interacted with the opposition and their life was threatened. But we must understand that PTSD presents itself and can be attributed to from a number of different experiences. These experiences can range from being a victim of seeing someone dying. PTSD can also be triggered from sexual trauma, from physical abuse. Also, if you live in high crime areas where you constantly saw fighting, just the sound of gunshots, seeing brutality by police and brutality of just violence amongst various people, where it was by gunplay, physical fights, and so forth. The repetitiveness of that particular experience can basically plant itself in your mind recurrently. And that every time that you see something similar to that reminds you of that experience, it produces a physiological change in oneself. We must understand that post-traumatic stress disorder is under the guise of trauma and stress-related disorders. It's an anxiety disorder. Okay? And it's under under the family of trauma and stress-related disorders, meaning that this is a family of disorders that people experience stress through negative events, adverse events. Now, I am also certified in what we call in providing trauma focused cognitive behavioral therapy, which is what I usually utilize to treat people who have this type of illness, or I utilize cognitive behavioral therapy. And so what I'm going to do is kind of talk about my experience, because I've dealt with people who have this disorder of all walks of life. I'm talking about experiencing a family member die. You can obtain post-traumatic stress from a near-death situation, from a car wreck, multiple car wrecks. Excuse me. Mass shootings, something where somebody was shooting up the place, particularly in the West Coast, particularly in the 80s and 90s, where there's high gang crime and so forth. Drive-by shootings were currently happening in your neighborhood, where you're literally, just living your daily life, and then you hear gunshots, and then everybody's going to the floor, but you're repetitively doing this type of behavior every day, every other day, or every week. That is post-traumatic stress. Someone attempting to sexually harass you or sexually impose their will on you, where when you're entering into a similar situation with the gender that imposed themselves on you, you begin to experience some type of physiological changes in oneself, some type of fear. These are elements of post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, in the DSM criteria, because this is what I am presenting from. So this is not D. Durrell just talking off his mind, although I can, because I got over 17, 18 years of treating people with this illness per se. And I have treated multiple people of all walks of life, whether they were in the military or non-military, that experienced some level of post-traumatic stress. I currently have clients that I'm treating right now that have this type of illness. And it is not a very easy illness to treat, because what you have to understand, when one is experiencing post-traumatic stress, no one knows, including them, when a situation can occur that can trigger them. And I'm going to continue to say the word trigger, because post-traumatic stress is a type of illness that is triggered by familiar stimuli that reminded them of the activating event that caused the stress in the first place. Okay? Now, in the DSM, they kind of talk about the criteria for kids that are over the age of 6, and then there's a criteria for those that are under the age of 6. I'm only going to deal with adults, because that's what I'm talking to right now. It's minor differences, not major differences with children and kids, because with kids, you're dealing with things that are more related to them as a child and what they experience and how they process, versus that of adults. So I'm going to speak from the perspective of adults and adolescents and so forth that are older, as opposed to dealing with more, early childhood. Okay. So again, guys, I do appreciate each and every one of you for coming in tonight. So I'm going to focus on talking about this. Want to give a shout out to NC Worker, give a shout out to Social Justice Warrior Stand Up for coming in today. Okay, so when we talk about post-traumatic stress disorder, we must understand that this is criteria that is created for adults, adolescents, children. Again, I'm going to focus on over the age of 6. Number one, what we have to focus on, the criteria. And you have to understand, in this criteria, one who has post-traumatic stress experiences at least 6 or more, or 7 or more of these features. And we're looking at about 8. We're looking at 8 different criteria. Okay. And I'm going to say, if someone
experiences this, at least half or more of those of these particular features, then it's highly likely that you probably have this type of illness. The first thing I want to talk about, and please guys, if you can relate to this or you know someone that has experienced this and you want to talk about it and put it in the chat, you're more than happy to ask questions as I'm discussing this issue, as far as whether you experienced this or you know someone else that exhibited behaviors that resemble post-traumatic stress, and I can kind of go more into detail. First thing we're going to look at is that, and I kind of talked about this, it's the exposure to something that was life-threatening. It caused a serious injury, sexual violence, and I stated that, whether it was physical, sexual, or some event that nearly threatened your life. This is, to me, is probably the most, of all of the features that I'm going to list, this is probably the most important, because what this talks about is the initial experience. The initial experience, what you came into contact that caused you to feel like your life was threatened or you got injured. That's why I talked about car wrecks. That's why I talked about near-death experiences, victims of natural disasters. Just living in a bad neighborhood, a violent neighborhood, where you're repetitively experiencing and seeing things all the time. Dealing with the cops can produce PTSD. Guys who've gotten beaten up multiple times by the cops. Black people. There's a large percentage of black people that suffer PTSD due to the unprofessional and predatory behavior of police. Let me repeat that. There's a large percentage of black people, particularly in urban communities, that have developed PTSD undiagnosed due to the experience of police. I've had countless, and I say countless, therapists, not therapists, but clients who talked about when they see the police, it triggers a certain level of stress and anxiety. The fact of them hearing a police siren triggers. The fact of them saying, just calling the police, calling 911 triggers. Because you don't know what they're going to do. They have witnessed in there and kept it in their psyche of witnessing police mistreat black people. Particularly black people that they probably know and love. So when we talk about, and to be honest with you, this is a particular disorder that is, to me, not given enough publicity and attention, particularly as it relates to how it is displayed or treated in the black community. Somebody that's in a fire, people that experience 9/11, that's post-traumatic stress. Those mass shootings in schools, the kids who tried to survive and run away, that is something that attributes to post-traumatic stress. Someone being sexually violated where they were almost raped, attempted rape, that can attribute to post-traumatic stress disorder. Being jumped on and beaten up by people, somebody pulling a gun on you. There are people who experience multiple issues. Guys that are participating in street gangs, where they've seen people killed or they had to, protect themselves by killing. Many of these guys have post-traumatic stress. They're very paranoid. They're anxious because they're constantly involved in risky behaviors that could potentially risk their life. These are facts. Now I'm going to talk more in regards to the exposure. We're talking about direct contact. I stated that. Witnessing things. I talked about that. The repetitiveness of that, such as like I talked about, people that live in particularly the West Coast, East Coast, or whatever, particularly the West Coast with the gang warfare, particularly in the 80s and 90s, the constant drive-by shootings where you basically chilling in your house, having a nice meal, and you hear somebody shooting, so you hurry up and jump into the floor. That is post-traumatic stress. That is post-traumatic stress. The initial reaction that you have been conditioned by a spontaneous action or violence that you instinctively dive to the floor no matter what you're doing and try to cover over others and so on to prevent yourself from dying. The next thing I want to talk about, in this situation, you're dealing with symptoms in which those traumatic events can either be recurrent. It produces dissociative reactions such as flashbacks, blacking out, intense psychological distress. And then I talked about the physiological issues such as sweating, shortness of breath, trembling, shaking, heart pounding. These are all attributed to the more of the symptoms associated with the event, meaning this is the reaction that your body gives or responds to when you are in a situation that reminds you of that event. So I'm going to repeat this again. We're talking about how often it happens, recurrently happening, involuntarily. We're talking about the on and on recurrent stressors that occur. We're talking about dreams. A lot of people who have post-traumatic stress, particularly in the criteria, if you've had more than 1 or 2 nightmares in a period of 10 to 12 months or more or less, where you have frequent or infrequent nightmares about that event that happens. It may happen once a month, may happen once a week. It may happen every 3 to 6 months. That is post-traumatic stress. Those are symptoms of post-traumatic stress. We're talking about the disassociativeness of it, reactions, the flashbacks, acting out as if you're in the event of protecting yourself. This is quite apparent for vets. They go into a position when they are triggered by people that look like their enemy or the gunshots or whatever, and they initially go into protect mode or soldier mode as if they are in the state of warfare, although their environment does not reflect that of the military. That's why they call it dissociative reaction. And see, when somebody's dealing with dissociative and they have other illnesses that kind of relate to dissociative disorders and so forth, it focuses on the fact that your reality versus your perception of what's occurring is outside of what is actually happening in reality. Meaning that you could be in a mall and you see Arabic people and you get triggered and think that you're in Saudi Arabia or whatever, and you start acting and functioning as if you are in that country fighting against that particular population of people. I've had multiple not Vietnam vets, but Army, Navy vets that have recently been across seas and done numerous tours in Iran and Iraq and Afghanistan who are unable to go out in certain areas because if they see certain types of people, it will trigger them to think that they are in a state of war. And they will treat those people as if they are attempting to kill them. You see, when we talk about, and I know we want to talk about post-traumatic slave syndrome, I'm not going to dive into that because what I'm going to say, and I understand what you're saying, Reggie Jackson, because the trauma that slaves experience by being beaten, seeing people hung, seeing their loved ones taken away from them, being mistreated, beaten, hit, maimed, and that recurrently happen. And our women being raped, and some of the men were raped. The very sight of a white man, or and so forth, at that time, triggered a certain level of anxiety. And that anxiety, as far as how to perceive black people, was passed on and taught from one generation to another, even to this day. Black people say, do, and perceive, and they produce defense mechanisms for the fact that they were under a condition of slavery. And this is what we have to do to survive. But I'm not going to go more into that. I'm going to focus on the PTSD. The third major feature is the fact of how you're avoiding your irrational need or irrational desire to avoid situations that you fear will trigger that response. So basically, let's say a person had gotten a bad car wreck may not want to drive again for a certain period of time, or they may have a certain amount of anxiety if they go to the street or the area or the neighborhood where they experience that near-death experience in a car wreck. A person, again, I talked about the example of a person that was in war in the Middle East, and they see certain types of people that they went to war against, and seeing those people presents it produces a level of anxiety that takes them to that mindset. A person that seeing their family members die in Hurricane Katrina or any type of hurricane Ike, and so on. Whenever they see rain, whenever they see it flooding, it produces a certain level of anxiety. It produces a certain level of stress that recurrently happens that causes them to have shortness of breath, sweating, shaking, trembling, all of these types of things. Now, I also can talk about the comorbidity of PTSD because PTSD is highly linked to other different illnesses. I'll talk about that at the end. Okay? So we're talking about the fact that you're basically afraid to go to certain places. You may be afraid to go into places where a lot of people. You're afraid to be around a certain demographic of people. You're afraid of if it's raining. You're afraid to interact with the cops. You're afraid to interact with any type of law enforcement. You're afraid to be around people you're not familiar with. There are people who have been raped. There are females. I've seen this a lot in females where they were raped by males or multiple men. And so they have a irrational trust for men that mean them no harm. But because of that identified event, they have a difficult time departmentalizing their traumatic event versus people that had nothing to do with the fact that they experienced this in the first place. So these are the things that occur. It's how you avoid it. The fact that you do things, you go out your way to not get involved in those situations. You may use extreme means to avoid those situations. And I'm talking about avoiding people, person, places, conversations, activities, objects, and so forth. I'm kind of I'm just kind of summarizing. I don't want to go word for word. I want to say it in a way that you can relate to. Being in certain neighborhoods where you saw this. Certain types of weather triggers. Certain music. Any observable event that occurred during that traumatic event may link you to wanting to avoid it, may cause or influence you to not want to experience it because it reminds you of that negative event that happened. Also, you want to look at negative altercations that affect your mood, your thinking, the events itself. And we're talking about things that remind you of the event, your beliefs about it, the exaggerated beliefs that you have about something. People may say irrational statements such as the world is dangerous, everybody's dangerous, I can't trust anybody, no one can be trusted. Doesn't that sound like a lot of Negroes in the hood? Man, you can't trust black folks. We have attributed to a great deal of this type of post-traumatic stress because of the negative things that we've done and hurting one another. This reminds me a lot of community, and when we say things, and there are people that literally come up and talk about how bad other black people are. There are black people, because of our self-hatred for one another, we're easily triggered in a negative sense by seeing other black people. Now, that's other things that contribute to that, because that was taught. But the fact of the matter is that black people, a lot of black people, when they experience post-traumatic stress disorder, they attribute it to a negative event, a near death, or a violent situation, an adverse situation that they experienced by the hands of other black people. And notice, we keep talking about recurrent things that are currently happening, things that are persistently happening. Now we're talking about the thought process, because in the midst of this, your perception is somewhat distorted. Your thought process is somewhat irrational, because you're thinking, just because this happened one time, if I get into a similar event or a similar event that has no evidence of supporting this happening again, you treat it all the same. And your approach to that current event is not warranted. It may cause you not to want to be as sociable. It may cause you not to want to socialize. It may cause you not to do a lot of the pleasurable things that you once wanted to do. This is under the feature of you having a distorted or altered, alterations, negative thinking, negative cognition, and negative mood. Okay? You have feelings of detaching yourself from places and others and other people. Thinking that, it's hard to be positive. It's hard to think that you can do pleasurable things, to have fun, to be happy, to be joyful. In the state of this, you're in a state of protectiveness, a heightened sense of awareness that is unwarranted. The fifth, it continues to talk about marked alterations in the arousal, the reacting of the event that was associated with the traumatic event. Meaning, from beginning or worsening, the traumatic events occurred as evidenced by two or more things. So what we're saying here is that we're looking at how there's a mark, or how intense it is, how you're triggered. We're looking at how the event triggers you. And it triggers you in a sense in which you're reacting in a certain way to protect yourself. It talks about irritable behavior, angry outbursts. We're talking about being reckless, self-destructive behavior, hurting yourself, doing things that can potentially put yourself at risk, exaggerated responses, problems with concentration. And then I talked about sleep, as far as having nightmares, difficulty falling asleep because of you thinking, having bad dreams. You're constantly restless. Also, we have to look at the next one. This number 6, the duration of the disturbance. And again, you must understand, I said it has to happen over a month, a period of 1 month. Now, I talked about having certain things that may happen over a year, 10 months. I'm saying when I was talking about that, I was meaning from a more recurrent, because if over a 10 or 12 month period, you're having these issues more than one time. In a month, you may experience this a few times, depending on how severe it is. So if these symptoms happen over a month, the duration has to be over a month from a clinical standpoint. These issues may cause disturbances in your ability to function as an adult in certain areas. And so if you're having PTSD, it will cause some level of disturbance as it relates to you socially, your workplace, or other important things that are fundamental to you in life. Meaning this, whether you in school, whether you at work, whether you in playing sports, whether you're involved in certain volunteerism, certain community organizations, any important or major areas of your life that involves you interacting with people, post-traumatic stress will cause some level of disturbance and hinder your ability to function at the level that you were prior to this occurring. And then the last one, we're going to talk about the physiological changes, which I've talked about. And that can be also due to substance abuse, alcohol, drugs, and other medications can attribute to this. What that's basically saying is that there could be outside other sources, such as things that you are consuming, that can also trigger the post-traumatic stress. Yes, post-traumatic stress can be caused at childhood if you've experienced a situation to trigger it. Again, our post-traumatic stress is caused by an activating event. You don't just develop post-traumatic stress unless that was an event that put you at risk. There has to be an event that caused the stress and trauma, the anxiety. There had to have been a near-death situation in which it affected you physically, or physically, or your life, or it was a near-death experience. What's up, Reggie Jackson? What's up, T. Pre? What's up, Boris Lemieux? What's up, Nkrumah Toure? What's up, NC Work again? Everybody's in here. I noticed my chat a little light tonight because I'm actually teaching some real stuff. That's okay. This is what I do for a living. So I'm not going to focus on the symptoms of kids 6 years and younger because that's the DSM criteria. I'm focusing on people 6 years and older because that relates to the population that I'm talking to right now. And for kids, there's some other things that I'd like to talk about. That it would be a whole nother show if I had to talk. I don't have enough time today to focus on things with kids because I've actually facilitated more therapy with children. If I look back at my whole career, I've dealt with more things with children than actually than adults. Actually, hypervigilance is also a term that is used. I didn't state that. That's not a term that I basically use, but you can talk about people being hypervigilant towards events and so forth. But that is a term that is used. Hypervigilance is actually used when we're talking about how easily you are aroused or reacting to certain traumatic events. And again, the event has to be familiar to you. It has to be similar. It has to be an event that when you experience it, it automatically influences you to think back to that event. So that doesn't mean that every time you go somewhere, you're gonna automatically experience these things. It has to be person, places, things, external stimuli in your environment that triggers you. You have to be triggered. Okay. I want to point this out again. Again, the anxiety is not contributed to by medication and alcohol or other medical conditions. Meaning that it cannot be triggered by the use of drugs or pharmaceuticals. It has to be triggered by events, not substances, not drugs, whether they were prescribed or not prescribed. Now, also, I want to get into the fact of the treatment, of how I treat people who are diagnosed with this illness. And we want to understand that there's multiple types of treatments. I, as a therapist, believe in the use of what's called cognitive behavioral therapy, particularly cognitive behavioral trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy. Now, I'm going to kind of talk about things in summary about this. I'm not going to necessarily talk about things in detail, but it's going to be more of a summary of how I treat people who have this illness and how they're helped. Now, there are many people that may use cognitive behavioral therapy that focuses on your thought process, your feelings, and your behavior. There's other therapies, such as solution-focused therapy, that focuses on problem solving and focuses on short term of you dealing with this. And it just focuses on the here and now, the present. We're not going to go into the past. We're not going to go. We're going to deal with how you're dealing with it presently. We're not going to focus on your historical coping mechanisms for the disease itself. We're going to focus on how are you dealing with this as of the last 3 to 6 months. Okay? So there's a difference. So I just wanted to, I'm going to go ahead and, and camera up. I decided to go ahead and camera up. So it focuses in that regard. And so we're looking at it from that perspective. Okay, we're going to look at it merely from that perspective. I utilize trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, particularly with children, because we do various things in which we want to focus on placing the individual, particularly children or adults, in which we have to, number one, assess the level of intensity of stress that they're experiencing. We have to assess how anxious they are, how stressed they are, how violent they can be triggered. So we, in somewhat, use what's called scripts, narrative scripts, where if a person can't verbalize, the client may not always be able to verbalize what happened, but they can draw, or I can present situations through art or through steps that they can visually see, where they can go hand in hand with the things that occurred to them that led to the post-traumatic stress. Particularly with trauma, we're focusing, particularly with trauma, what we're doing is we're placing the child or the adult into the activating event. And that can be very uncomfortable. There's a technique called flooding, in which you put a person in that event in a controlled setting so that they don't get out of control. You want to control it. Like some instances, I can use a technique called imagery, where I place a person to imagine where they are or to imagine what they experience, having them in a relaxed state in which they are thinking about the event, and then they are using a set of verbal or physical cues, whether they're tapping on a door, they're clapping, or they're doing some type of stimulus, some type of auditory, whatever type of signal that lets me know the rate of intensity of the anxiety or the things that necessarily created the stress that they have. So meaning if I can ask a person, imagine you're alone with a guy in the room. I want you to think about it and relax. And I'm talking to them in a monotone voice, giving them steps. And as the person, and I may say, okay, this person comes closer to you. Let me know your level of anxiety. They may tap their finger, clap. They may say a signal word or something to let me know this is the level it's at from 1 to 10, or where this is where it becomes intolerable for them at that moment. I may use art. I may use a variety of different things to help them go through those steps. Again, you can use, I talked about the use of solution focused therapy and also behavioral therapy too, cognitive behavioral therapy, but also I look at trauma focused, concentrated cognitive behavioral therapy that is trauma focused, meaning that I'm focusing on the traumatic event. People who have PTSD experienced a traumatic event. This is not something that occurred organically. This is not something that occurred because you were drinking or something. Well, if you're drinking and driving, you got in a wreck, but it didn't affect something physiologically to say you have trauma. It has to be something that you produced recklessly or somebody caused to you based on violence or what have you. Or if you're in a state of war, or we're looking at natural disasters or dangerous situations where you feel your life was threatened. That's the criteria. Now, notice as I talked about things such as being recurrent, persistent, repetitive. Because what we're focusing on a cycle of these things occurring more than one time, consistently happening multiple times. If you listen to me, I consistently said those types of words, and I said that for a reason, because you cannot have post-traumatic stress if you had an event one time and then 5 years later you're saying that no. Within a month you're going to have multiple situations, and it may happen in cycles. But also you have to look at the certain level of anxiety that prevents you from socializing, from working, from interacting, and doing the things that you normally did out of fear of something negative happening. And that's where it goes into the aspect of you thinking, of you perceiving something bad happening, or you being ultra guarded of oneself. Because you're placing yourself as if this happens, which is irrational, that the same thing that happened to you that caused it is going to happen again. And that's an irrational thought. Those things are irrational. What's up, Oracle? What's up, Recognized Gang? What's up, we them boys? Appreciate you all for coming in. So I want you all to understand that. So when I'm using cognitive behavioral therapy or trauma focus, I'm focusing on thinking, feelings, and behaviors. The thinking, feelings, and behavior is all influenced by the traumatic event or the near-death or adverse event that occurred. The event occurred. Now, how I'm going to deal with it. Another therapy that I think that works really good with that is called rational emotive behavioral therapy, because rational emotive behavior kind of deals with the fact that there's an activating event, just like the trauma being an activated event, and you kind of talk about your behavior, how you felt about it, how you reacted to it, how you used a behavior to resolve it or to cope with it, and then you constantly go over it to resolve the problem. Okay? But to me, I feel, in my opinion, cognitive behavioral therapy, for the most part, is to me the best evidence-based type of therapy in my position to use, because they have measurables. You can create goals and treatments that can be measured over time to identify the improvements. Now, you can also use other therapies such as person-centered therapy can also help you with that, building trust and things like that. I think that is also good. Also, dialectic behavioral therapy is also another one where you're focusing. You're focusing more on regulating your emotion. as opposed to learning how to deal with what triggered the behavior. Dialectic behavioral therapy and cognitive behavioral therapy are very similar. The difference is that cognitive focuses more on the event as far as how you perceive it, whether it's irrational or rational, and how you respond. Dialectic behavioral therapy focuses more on the mood regulation and how you respond to it, the emotional aspects of you. Yes, the event happened, but how are you going to reduce the depression? How are you going to reduce the anxiety? Now, let's kind of talk about comorbidity, meaning it runs in lines with other illnesses. There are people who have post-traumatic stress disorder who may experience other illnesses such as major depression. They may experience bipolar disorder. They may also have a personality disorder, particularly the cluster C disorders that are made up of antisocial personality disorder, bipolar personality disorder, histrionic personality disorder, and narcissistic personality, particularly the cluster B. Many of people that I've treated, they may have bipolar. I'm sorry, they may become borderline. They may have borderline or antisocial personality disorder. For the most part. Also, I'm also miss histrionic. Also, that's also a cluster B. But I have seen multiple clients that have had that have had antisocial or borderline personality disorder that was comorbid with PTSD. Also, people with PTSD, they may have other issues. They may have other emotional issues. They may also, with that PTSD, they may have another behavioral disorder. They may have other things like that may accompany that. Okay, I've already listed like mood disorders per se. They may have an intellectual disorder associated with that. Just because you may have a certain level of intelligence or lack thereof doesn't mean that you're that makes immunes you from experiencing a negative behavior. So yes, it runs in lines with things like that. A person with PTSD may develop schizophrenia. They may develop some of the thought disorders, the psychotic disorders. Maybe schizoaffective. They may have schizophrenia. They may develop that potentially. So there's multiple illnesses that may go in line with PTSD. I'm going to say this. One of the biggest things that runs comorbidity with PTSD is substance abuse. Because substance abuse can present a heightened sense of experience. It can produce what I would say a pseudo sense of functioning, a fake sense of a grandiose sense of self where you're thinking the high is alleviating the stress. Well, what the high is really doing is deterring you from dealing with the stress. There's a high percentage of people that have PTSD that drink a lot. They smoke marijuana. They use other forms of drugs. They may misuse pain pills. They may misuse the anti-anxiety medication that is used to treat them. They may misuse those things. And when we're talking about the medications, that's a good segue into the medications. We're talking about medications such as Valium, Xanax, Ativan, clonazepam. But to me, of the ones I'm just listing, the better, I guess the most effective medications, when we're looking at psychopharmacology, we're looking at Zoloft is effective in treating PTSD, Paxil, Prozac, Paxil, and Effexor, those SSRIs. Now, that is not my area of expertise in the medication. I am not a psychiatrist. I am a licensed professional counselor. So I'm only listing those things that I know to treat it and to be effective. As far as the aspects of what they do, I'm not trained in knowing exactly how that decreases the symptoms. That's not my level, but I do understand as a therapist, when I'm collecting the data for treating these clients and knowing their medications, these are some of the medications that are listed. And these are the things that come up. Okay. So let's look. I want to also talk about the fact that a lot of people with PTSD, they're not very open to therapy initially. A lot of them it may take a great deal of time. There's some that are, but most probably go a certain period of time before they actually get the help. There are a lot of veterans, there are a lot of people who experience PTSD that don't want to get help because of the fear of shame. They don't want to be identified as being crazy, labeled crazy, because there's a certain level of a taboo-ness, particularly in the Black community, when it relates to mental health services. And that basically contributes to why they continue to have the issues, because they're not seeking the proper help. So if you're not seeking the proper help, you're going to only continue to intensify. Your symptoms are only going to intensify and get worse over time without being treated. Also, there are people who have PTSD that can be very suicidal. They can be homicidal, particularly in the event of the stress event in their reaction, meaning that when they're reacting, because they're so guarded, they come into defense mode and they can become very violent, and they can hurt someone or kill someone that they perceive to be an enemy or a person of the event that caused them to be in that event in the first place. There are many vets, and I'm using veterans, but veterans are a good example, because there are many veterans that went into that mindset of being triggered and they killed somebody, thinking that they were at war, or they hurt somebody, they were violent. They had violent tendencies and they hurt or killed someone because of that. Then you have situations where the symptoms become so unbearable, they don't want to experience it anymore, and then they may kill themselves because they don't want to live like this. They don't know how to cope with the issues. They don't know how to deal with the day-to-day. They don't want to take the medications. They don't want the therapy. They just want to end it all. Unfortunately, PTSD at its extreme level can produce this level of thinking that is that level of decompensating can cause one to react in ways that can be fatal to themselves or somebody else. Unfortunately, but that's the reality. So I kind of gave you all a summary, roundabout summary of the DSM-4, of the DSM-5. This is the book that I use. This is the book that I study. This is the DSM, where I get this information from those that want to know. And I'm using, again, all the information I talked about is in this book. This is the book that I use when I am diagnosing and assessing clients and determining what they have and so on. That book is, to me, used at all times. The most valuable book that I have, besides some of the therapeutic books and work that I do. And so in that, you will find the symptoms. In that, you will find all things that contribute to, from a textbook sense of what PTSD is. And again, it talks about the traumatic event. It talks about how you respond to it, your emotion, how you rationally perceive things, disassociating from things, the physiological aspects of it, how you react to things, how guarded you are, negative, psychological changes in your body, your level of function, how it can hinder your ability to socialize, work, do the day-to-day, daily living activities that you typically do, engaging in pleasurable activities. PTSD can basically put you in a position where you're too afraid to do these things because you think something negative is going to happen based on that event that triggered the trauma in the first place. So, guys, I'm going to accept anybody has any questions in the chat room. You're more than happy to ask me questions in the chat room, and then I'll go from there. If you want to ask me questions, please ask me questions. I'm going to take the next 5 to 10 minutes to ask questions, and then I'm going to go ahead and wrap up. Okay. Reggie Jackson said define bipolar. Okay. Well, that's not related to PTSD, but bipolar is basically a mood disorder that is characterized by mood instability, in which you go from a sense of being manic to a sense of being depressed. And in that, it may affect your ability to eat, your ability to sleep, your concentration. People that have bipolar have characteristics of flighty thoughts, reckless behavior. They may, in a sense of once they become manic, they may crash and become so depressed where they're oversleeping, they're tired, they're lethargic, flighty thoughts, rapid speech, impulsive behavior. That makes up what bipolar is. Okay, you also can become suicidal or homicidal in a state of a manic episode, particularly suicidal, whether you're in a manic or a depressed state. In a manic state, you're probably engaging in a risky behavior just on the fact of your mood is heightened. When you are in a depressed state, it's because you're thinking negative. You're thinking the world is gloomy, and you may do something to want to end your life because you don't want that experience anymore. So that's what bipolar basically is. Black Einstein Production says, is post incarceration a form of PTSD? That is not a clinical term. That's more of a sociological type term in which it is related. It kind of characterizes behavior of how people experience stress being incarcerated, and they're unable to adjust to normal within the confines of society, as opposed to being in a prison population versus being in a free world society. And a lot of people that have post incarceration still live and function as if they are in jail. They may still have a certain level of guardiness, violence. They may act and follow. They may want people to verbally command them to do things, just like the guards would verbally command them to do things. They may walk around people that appear to be untrustworthy or violent or threatening to them, and they may act as if they're still, because they've been institutionalized, because this has repetitively occurred with them over and over. They're unable to adjust and just let that go once they are released into free society, into the regular population. And so they still have those same behaviors that they develop to stay alive and survive, and they apply it, unfortunately, to the free society, and it doesn't necessarily it kind of makes them feel out of place, and other people may think that they are socially awkward. Okay. Any other questions before I wrap up? Any other questions? Okay. Black Einstein Production says, last thing, D, do they clinically treat children with PTSD with the same as adults? No, they don't. I'm glad you stated that. That's why I stated what I talked about today were the symptoms as defined by being 6 years and up versus being 6 years and younger. Now, the thing about it is, when we're looking at the DSM, we're talking about 6 years and younger. We're focusing on things that are more in line with how children cope and deal with things at that age. Memories, flashbacks, because adults, being that they're more developed, they deal with and they conceptualize the events a little different from children, because children is more imaginary. Children may act out behavioral wise and so on. Now the symptoms are very much similar. It's more about at that age how kids respond to things versus how adults, because kids may respond to post-traumatic stress in the way they play with other kids. They may be violent to other kids. They may act out sexual acts, physical acts, verbally say things that the perpetrators say, or the people that they witness doing things, versus an adult may not do those things. Kids may mimic the behavior of the traumatic event as opposed to adults trying to protect themselves from the traumatic event. It's a difference. What's up, High Pre-Empress? She said, thanks, D. Darrell. You seem to be very proficient in your craft. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being here. So, again, guys, I gave a summary of this, of PTSD itself. And I summarized it because you were looking at a total of 8 different features. And in these 8 features, it all has, they kind of run in line with each other. But if you have over half, now let's say somebody has 1 or 2 of the symptoms, then it means you just have traits of PTSD, and it may filter into another anxiety disorder, not necessarily PTSD. You may have a panic attack, a panic, or something like that. Not necessarily another stress or anxiety disorder, but not necessarily post-traumatic stress. You have to have at least 4 or 5, have at least 5 or more of those symptoms that all run simultaneously with each other, that makes up your behavior consistently on a day-to-day basis to be labeled post-traumatic stress. So you just can't have 1, 2, or 3 and say, oh, I have several of these, so that means I have it. No. What it means is that you collectively have these multiple, at least 5 or more of those symptoms, and that will comprise of post-traumatic stress disorder. Okay? So, T. Pre said, excellent information, D. Thank you. Appreciate it. So, I said I did this for a reason, because I do understand there are people who may have this type of illness. I do understand that one of the better content creators in this sector, even though me and him have not had a great past with each other, but we've kind of nipped that in the bud and moved forward. But I understand that he has this illness itself. I thought it was basically incumbent upon me to educate you, to understand when he talks about certain things. You can use this video as a reference to why he may do and say certain things. And I'm pretty sure there are probably other people who are viewing or have viewed who may know someone or also have experienced post-traumatic stress one way or the other, that this can in some way shed some light on why you're doing things. I also talked about the treatments that you can engage in, also the medications that one may take. Okay. Now I may have mentioned a medicine that somebody doesn't take. That's tons of different medicines. Again, that's not my specialty, but I just presented a few of them to give you some basis of where I'm coming from, or at least you can look at the family of those types of meds that treat it. Okay. So other than that, let's see. Somebody else said, Recognized Game said, do you believe psychotropic drugs help clients reduce social undesirable behaviors, or do the drugs alter the client's perception of reality, thus never transferring skills? I believe that psychoactive drugs, they don't necessarily reduce undesirable functioning, but what it does is it lowers the inhibitions of one's emotions to act a certain way, meaning that it doesn't alter perception, but because drugs can't affect your thinking. If you're an intelligent person, you're going to be intelligent whether you take the drugs or not. If you're a person that has made bad decisions, you're going to probably still make bad decisions. But what I'm looking at is more in Recognized Game is the emotional aspects of it, as far as it controlling natural inhibitions, meaning that it can make you less triggered to react in a stressful, in an anxiety, in a fearful manner. It could put you in a better, like if you're in a low mood, it can lift you up from being in a lower mood to a more higher pleasurable mood in a sense. It can affect the way you outwardly behave and speak, and things of that sort. It can reduce observable symptoms. Now, I'm not going to say it reduces undesirable behaviors, of course, because if you're a person that cries a lot and you're negative, the behavior, the medicine may help you not feel down and tired and overwhelmed. It can lift your spirits up and increase your mind, your mood. It can maybe stop you from crying as much, but it's not going to stop you from thinking negative. If you're a person that thinks negative, therapeutically, counseling strategies can help you to change and adjust your thought process. The medicine is not going to change your thought process. It's only going to change the observable behaviors and your responses to things and the level of emotion that one exhibits to the interaction with others, in a sense, to make them more functional. It can improve your concentration. It can improve, your hostility or lack of hostility, and things of that sort. Your overall mood, just the way you function with other people, the way you speak, the triggering. It can reduce you being triggered, in a sense, not necessarily how you think, because it can influence it in a sense of, if you feel more positive, you're probably going to think more positive. But as far as it controlling how you think, no, it doesn't. Medication does not control how you think. Okay, medication affects the symptomology as far as the outward behavior. It can reduce, or it can, what I would say, flatten a person who's manic and make them less manic. Or of a person who's depressed, it can bring your mood up. Doesn't mean you're not going to think more positive or negative. It just can make you, it can put you in a position where you feel more functional, the drive to want to do more things, as opposed to being lethargic or isolated. Okay, that's what the medication does. It handles certain symptoms. Okay, so with that being said, if there's not anything else, guys, I'm going to go ahead and give it another minute or so. If anybody has another question, I hope I answered your question. Recognize game if you have any other question as it pertains to that. So it does reduce the likelihood, the intensity of those behaviors. As far as it affecting your perception of reality, unless, to me, if you want to look at, if you look at people who are psychotic, it can reduce the levels of hallucination. Those are dealing with more sensory. So, if you're a person that thinks a ghost is here, or a person you're hearing and seeing things, the medication can reduce the brain chemistry in a way that basically suppresses that, or makes it very minimal. But you may still have hallucinations, or auditory hallucinations, or visual hallucinations. You may still be delusional, but it may be less. It may be manageable. And so the whole thing, we're looking at PTSD and other mental illnesses, there's no cure, but the focus is to manage it. The focus is to allow people to be functional. There's no cure, unfortunately. And there's some people that experience these things and they move forward, and they're at a place where you don't even know they have anything, because their treatment is so in line with where it needs to be. They're functioning at a high level where what we would want them to. We want people to function at a high level where no one can tell whether or not they have a mental illness or not. That's good treatment. Minister Anderson said, I can't believe I'm admitting this, but this has been very informative. Respect. Guys, man, look, I know y'all get caught up in the D. Durrell character, but I'm a real fucking therapist. I'm really a therapist, guys. I know sometimes I say shit that y'all be like, why is he, how can a therapist talk? Guys, I'm legit, man. Y'all know y'all gotta understand, D. Durrell, the channel that I have is part entertaining and me being therapeutically inclined to say stuff. I have to project a certain personality to grasp your attention. If I came in here just strictly on an academic standpoint, I would not gain your attention as well. Even though I'm good at doing the informative things, I can say a lot of informative things, a lot of things that's very educational, and I can present it in a way that you can understand, present it in a way that you can learn from. My main hope is that the information that I have given today can be used as a reference point, but also if there's somebody watching in the bushes, in the clouds, if you experience a multiple of the things that I talked about, if you experience those things and you know somebody else that has similar behaviors, that can produce a line in which you're going to treatment, to get treatment. That's my purpose. That was my original purpose of coming on YouTube, was to produce content that will have to help people be more inclined to seek mental health treatment instead of thinking that they can handle it on their own, or in the Black community, go to the church and other people to try to deal with things that they are ill-equipped to deal with. Okay? So, with that being said, guys, I appreciate you all for coming in. This is D. Durrell with D. Durrell The Rebirth. I hope you enjoyed the video that I did today. This can be used as a reference point. I may try to do a little bit more of these from time to time. I may pick out a certain illness and just educate you on that illness, and then we can have a discussion about it, and you all can ask questions. Okay? You all have a great night.